This guy ate the immortal fruit to become the strongest, but instead of gaining immortality, he was reincarnated. The story began in a sacred place where the legendary divine tree stood tall, its branches reaching toward the sky like ancient arms. There, a man named Gilphus stood with his body covered in blood, his breathing heavy and labored as he stared at the tree in awe. For generations, it had been told that a powerful divine dragon guarded this tree and its precious fruit, a fruit said to grant eternal immortality to whoever ate it. As Gilphus looked at the massive tree before him, he could barely believe that he had actually made it this far. He had faced countless dangers and overcome impossible odds, and in the end, he had even defeated the divine dragon that had protected the tree for centuries. Even though he still felt incredibly weak from the fierce battle, Gilphus forced himself to stand up straight, his eyes fixed on a spot high up in the tree's canopy. Then, suddenly, something in the tree began to glow with a soft, golden light. It was the fruit of immortality, hanging there like a small, perfect sun. A wave of disbelief washed over him as he realized he had truly reached his goal, and with trembling hands he climbed the tree's thick trunk and took the fruit from its branch. He held it for a moment, feeling its warm energy seep into his skin, before he began to eat it slowly, savoring each bite. In that moment, he knew that with the power of immortality, he would finally be able to fulfill his lifelong dream of pursuing the ultimate heights of martial arts, pushing his skills beyond anything anyone had ever achieved before. Many decades passed, and the scene shifted to the grand palace of the Dragon family, where all the members of the family had gathered in one room, their faces filled with sadness and worry. Gilphus, who had eaten the immortal fruit so long ago, was now the father of the family, and his first son, Gilliam, stood beside him with tears in his eyes, saying that he did not want to lose his father. Gilphus looked down at his son, his own heart heavy with regret, as he spent his last moments with the people he loved most in the world. He could not believe that the fruit he had eaten all those years ago had not granted him immortality at all. It had all been a lie, a cruel trick that had led him to believe he would live forever. Despite the pain of this realization, he tried to accept his fate calmly, telling his family that he had already lived a long and full life. But deep inside his heart, he knew the truth. He had not lived enough, and if he had been given more time, he would have finally been able to reach the ultimate peak of martial arts that he had worked so hard to achieve. As he took his final breath, Gilliam cried out in agony, his voice echoing through the quiet room. Then, in an instant, Gilphus woke up, and the first thing he noticed was that his body felt strange, light and small, as if he had been stripped of all his strength. He looked down at his hands and saw that they were the tiny, soft hands of a baby, and when he looked around, he recognized the wallpaper on the walls as the one from the annex of the Dragon family palace. Confusion flooded his mind as he wondered how a warrior of his caliber, someone who had reached the 10-star level in martial arts, could have become a baby without even realizing it, or who could have possibly done this to him. Then suddenly a memory surfaced in his mind. It must have been the work of the so-called immortal fruit he had eaten so many years ago. In that moment, he realized that the fruit's true effect was not immortality, but reincarnation. And even though he had never expected anything like this to happen, a feeling of joy and hope filled his heart. He looked around the room and saw that there were many other babies there with him, and he knew that he had been reborn into the Dragon family once again. Just then, a maid entered the room, carrying a tray with several bottles in her hands, ready to feed the babies. To Gilphus's surprise, she took out a small goblin from a cage beside the tray and began to feed it with one of the bottles. Almost immediately, the goblin's stomach started to glow with a bright, intense light, and before anyone could react, it suddenly exploded in a burst of energy. Gilphus watched in shock, his baby eyes wide with fear and confusion as the maid walked over to him and picked him up gently, holding a bottle out to his mouth. In that moment, he realized that whatever was in the bottle contained immense power, power that was far too strong for a baby's body to handle, and he knew he must not drink it. But despite his better judgment, his baby instincts took over, and he opened his mouth and began to drink. As soon as the liquid touched his tongue, he realized what it was. Ancient dragon blood, diluted down so that it could be given to the babies of the Dragon family. He remembered hearing about this process back when he was alive the first time, how the family would dilute the powerful dragon blood to make it safe for their newborns. Panic set in, and he tried to spit out the drink, just as the other babies in the room were instinctively doing. But then, a thought crossed his mind. This was an opportunity, a chance to absorb this incredible power, and maybe even surpass the strength he had possessed in his previous life. With that, he reached out his tiny hands and grabbed the bottle from the maid's grasp, bringing it to his mouth and drinking as fast as he could. The liquid disappeared from the bottle quickly, flowing into his small body in a rush, and as soon as he finished it, he began to feel an immense wave of pain wash over him, so strong that he could barely stand it. The one who was feeding him was shocked to see how quickly he drank the first bottle, and then he began absorbing the contents of the second one just as eagerly. Soon after, the ancient dragon soul that had been within the blood started to wander through the space around him, and in that moment, it suddenly caught sight of a divine dragon spirit nearby. The two powerful souls recognized each other immediately and began to merge together, and as their union was completed, a bright light explosion erupted in the room. Gilfus felt weak after fully absorbing both bottles of dragon blood, but he managed to stay conscious, and the other baby who had undergone the same ritual instinctively survived too. As infants, they got tired easily, and not long after the merging, Gilfus fell into a deep sleep. 7 years passed in the blink of an eye, and Gilfus had grown into a strong, capable kid. One day, he was seen lifting a huge rock using only his foot, then casually throwing it aside as if it weighed nothing at all before standing up with perfect ease. By this time, Gilfus had been given the name Zeke Dragon, and he owed his incredible strength to the ancient dragon soul that had merged with him. In this world, all living beings possessed a special kind of power, and the ancient dragon blood that the babies had drunk contained immense energy. Because of this, the infants who survived the ritual were blessed with far stronger bodies than ordinary people. Zeke, who had completely absorbed the dragon blood and also merged with the divine dragon power, became even more powerful than the others, though currently his strength was only at the 1-star level, and now he's gonna reach 4-star. In this land, the number of stars a person had directly reflected their power, and in his previous life, Zeke had achieved the unprecedented rank of 10 stars. He had been reborn as a legitimate son of the Dragon family, but his mother had already passed away, and his father had never once shown up to see him. While he was shocked to find himself reborn, he was even more stunned to discover that 1,000 years had passed since his previous life, and in this new era, it was a world of survival of the fittest. The ritual of feeding dragon blood to babies was known as the Dragon Trial, and only those who survived it were allowed to be educated as Dragon warriors. Suddenly, a maid approached him, and Zeke asked her why he had not yet received any combat training, explaining that while physical conditioning was important to him, he was already able to fight in his own way. He also asked if she had any information about the other children who had survived the Dragon Trial, but the maid remained silent. Frustrated, Zeke asked if that was all she could say, but she replied that she could not answer that question either. When he questioned whether his treatment was too harsh, she told him that she was only following orders. The maid herself was a 3-star warrior, so she would have been more than enough to teach him basic combat skills. Deciding not to waste any more time, Zeke headed for the nearby forest, and the maid simply ignored him as he left. The forest was beautiful, with tall trees and lush greenery, and Zeke soon found a poisonous plant that he knew would help with his training. It tasted terrible, but he ate it without hesitation, knowing it would strengthen his resistance to toxins. As he continued walking, he detected the presence of someone hiding nearby and called out, telling the person to come out if they had something to say. As he explored further, he also sensed a strange creature approaching, and when he looked up, he saw an anger boar, a beast that had not existed in his previous life. The boar noticed him immediately, let out a loud growl, and charged straight at him. Zeke felt a surge of excitement at the thought of fighting, and he easily dodged the boar's attack before preparing to strike. With a single punch, he sent the boar flying through the air, and he felt pleased to see just how strong he had become. He picked up the boar's body and continued on his way. Unknown to Zeke, a man had been watching him from the shadows, surprised by how easily he had defeated the boar and how quickly he had detected his presence. The man wondered why Zeke, who seemed to have no family to teach him, was so talented, and he thought that even if Zeke was illegitimate, a mistake in his observation, he must still be part of the head family's bloodline. With that thought, the man disappeared without a trace. When Zeke returned to his house, he noticed several powerful warriors waiting outside, 3 of them at the 4-star level and 1 at 5-star. He wondered what such skilled fighters were doing there, but he could tell they meant no harm, so he walked up and asked them their business. The warriors, who wore the L-Dragon family emblem, immediately stood straight, bowed to him, and explained that they had come to escort him to take an official power examination. Zeke was shocked by the news, especially since he had not been taught anything about the exam or the world's fighting techniques. Still, he invited them inside, and they began to talk peacefully about what the examination would entail. Later on, Zeke appeared wearing a uniform, still finding it hard to believe that he was returning to the main state. Though they had been invited to come there, it was not to live permanently. Instead, their purpose was to aim for entry into the dragon nest. He felt glad to have made it this far, yet at the same time he couldn't help but feel sad because he had not been taught anything at all since arriving. As he sat there lost in thought, someone approached and asked if he was okay. It was a boy named Rangus who had come from Ordscale Village. Zeke looked up and asked who the boy was, so Rangus introduced himself and repeated his question about whether Zeke was doing all right. In that moment, Zeke noticed that while Rangus seemed timid on the surface, he was actually very perceptive. Zeke stood up and apologized for his initial confusion before introducing himself, admitting that he was completely confused about what the test would entail. Rangus then told him that the test content did not change every year, and when Zeke said he had no idea what the test involved at all, Rangus was shocked to hear this. Suddenly, a voice called out, labeling them as weaklings. The 2 boys looked over out of curiosity and saw Retin, another boy from Ordscale Village, who shouted at them to get lost. Rangus told Retin that they planned to take the test anyway, but Retin only shouted at him louder and began to mock him, saying that his father was just a pseudo-dragon. Rangus clenched his fist tightly in anger as he remembered the clear hierarchy among the L-Dragon people, from the highest ranks all the way down to the pseudo-dragons, who were those who had never been able to enter the dragon nest. More than anything, Rangus wanted to prove that he could succeed where his father had not. Just then, Zeke spoke up, asking Retin and his friends, "So what if he is?" The group fell silent for a moment before asking Zeke if he had a problem with them, to which Zeke simply replied that he was just asking. Retin then insisted that Rangus would never make it because he was weak, but Zeke asked them if they were really sure about that, a question that left Rangus feeling shocked. In a cold, steady voice, Zeke said that Rangus was probably stronger than all of them, and Rangus could barely believe what he was hearing. The boys grew angry at this and started complaining loudly, but their bickering was cut short when someone shouted, "Attention!" It was the adult dragon examiner who announced that the exam would be starting soon. Retin left with a warning that he would remember Zeke's face, and Zeke found himself confused, thinking that kids these days got angry so easily. Rangus explained that anyone would get upset after hearing someone say that Rangus was stronger than them, and Zeke then commented that since the exam was mandatory, giving up was not an option. To his surprise, Rangus told him that it was actually possible to withdraw, and he even suggested that Zeke could leave now to avoid getting hurt. But Zeke shook his head and said that someone like him would never withdraw, and the 2 of them then prepared to take the examination together. The examiner stepped forward and explained that the test required each candidate to leave a scratch on a set of large rocks, and that they would only be given 3 attempts to do so. Zeke felt disappointed at first, thinking that the test was too easy. He couldn't believe that after going through the dragon ritual, the exam was something so simple. Then the examiner announced that the test had begun, and the first candidate stepped forward looking very nervous. The boy drew his sword and performed a strike, and Rangus was startled by the force of the impact. But in an instant, the boy's sword broke into pieces, and blood started pouring from his arms. Zeke watched in shock as the boy collapsed in pain, unable to attempt the remaining 2 strikes because of his injuries. The examiner then called the next candidate, and Rangus felt a wave of anxiety wash over him as he thought about his own turn. Zeke turned to him and asked what kind of rock it was, and Rangus explained that the rock had a special property. It could repair minor scratches on its surface and reflect the force of any impact back at the striker 100 times over. He added that the only way to leave a scratch was to properly circulate the force within their body before striking, so that the impact was directed into the rock rather than being reflected back. Zeke realized immediately that this meant the quality of the martial arts someone had learned was less important than their ability to control and handle their own power. As he watched more candidates try and fail, some breaking their weapons, others getting hurt, he understood that only a small number of people would be able to pass this exam. After many candidates had attempted and failed the test, the examiner announced that the next candidate was number 315. It was Zeke's turn, and Rangus reminded him once again that he could still withdraw if he wanted to. But Zeke just smiled and said, "Nah, I'd win," leaving Rangus feeling even more concerned about him. Zeke walked down to the area where the rocks were placed, and as he did so, the examiner's eyes widened in shock at what he saw. A very strong, powerful aura was surrounding Zeke's body, unlike anything he had seen from the other candidates that day. The examiner asked Zeke if he would use a weapon, but Zeke replied that his fist was more than enough for the task at hand. The people watching from the sidelines burst out laughing, as they thought this was a foolish and dumb act that would only lead to failure. Even Rangus, who had been standing close by, felt a deep sense of worry for Zeke. He kept thinking that he should have stopped him before he made such a reckless decision. Soon after, the examiner stepped forward and announced that the test was about to start. It was Zeke's very first time seeing that particular type of mineral rock, and he stared at it for a moment to take in its rough texture and massive size before he began to prepare himself to strike. Rangus, still filled with anxiety, shouted out his name in concern as Zeke got into position. As Zeke raised his hand to punch, he felt a surge of excitement rushing through his body, completely ignoring the fear that everyone else seemed to feel for him. When he finally threw the punch, Rangus was left in total shock at what he witnessed. Zeke delivered a burst strike so incredibly strong that the impact produced a loud explosion that echoed through the area. Even Zeke himself was startled by the huge force of his own attack, and the examiner could barely believe what he had just seen. With a confident smile on his face, Zeke looked at the rock, which had been crushed clean in half, and he knew that his advanced ability was still not fully compatible with his body yet. Happily, he said that he still had a lot of training to do, even as blood started to drip from his injured hand. The crowd fell silent, their laughter replaced by pure shock as they watched this unfold. And even Retin, one of the other participants, was amazed that Zeke had managed to shatter the rock so easily. In the middle of the crowd, a girl suddenly found herself becoming interested in him, her eyes fixed on his calm and determined expression. Rangus, however, was still very worried about Zeke's injury, though Zeke just kept smiling, not letting the pain or concern get to him. The examiner was particularly shocked because he knew that only someone with a 4-star ranking or above could pull off such a powerful strike. He also knew that Zeke was an illegitimate child, and he wondered if this incredible strength came from being part of the head's bloodline. At the same time, he felt like he had seen that exact technique used somewhere before. After a moment of silence, Zeke asked the examiner how he had done in the test, and the examiner quickly replied that he had passed with flying colors. Another examiner then handed him a small bottle, and Zeke looked at it with confusion. Not knowing what was inside, the examiner, in a rather impatient tone, told him to hurry up and clear the area so the next test could begin. Zeke felt a little pissed off at how prickly and unkind they were being, but he said nothing and stepped aside. Rangus immediately walked over to congratulate him, telling him how amazing he had been. Zeke then held up the bottle and asked what was in it, and Rangus explained that it was a healing potion. Zeke looked at the liquid inside and decided it did not seem like poison. He also knew that this kind of medicine was made from very rare materials, with some ingredients coming from special roots that only grew in secret realms and others harvested from divine beasts. He then took a drink of the potion, and to his surprise, his injured arm healed instantly. Zeke was shocked because he realized this was not just a regular healing potion, but a spirit potion, though Rangus had no idea what a spirit potion was. Even after the healing was done, Zeke still could not believe that such powerful things existed after 1,000 years had passed. Soon, it was time for the next participants to take their turn. First was number 383, who was Retin, and he passed the test without much trouble. One by one, the other participants also completed their tests and passed. Then it was number 414's turn, which was Rangus. Rangus was so nervous that his hands were shaking as he stepped forward, but Zeke tried to cheer him up, telling him to stay calm and trust himself. Zeke was confused, however, when he saw what Rangus was holding, a sword, instead of the weapon he usually used. Rangus, feeling anxious, swung the sword at the rock, but the impact bounced back and made him fall to the ground. He tried again, swinging the sword with all his might, but once more the impact reflected off the rock and he fell. Rangus felt a wave of fear wash over him, as he realized he could not seem to do it right. The people watching started to laugh again, mocking him for being weak and for being the child of a pseudo-dragon. Retin also joined in the teasing, asking Zeke about the time he had said Rangus was stronger than all of them. The examiner then spoke up, telling Rangus that he had only one more attempt left, which made him even more nervous and scared. Suddenly, Zeke walked over to him and asked why he was using a sword instead of a spear. He explained that a sword was not suitable for Rangus at this point in his training, and that he would have a better chance with his usual weapon. Retin, hearing this, thought of how stupid both of them were and began laughing even harder, and the crowd also agreed that changing weapons in the middle of the test would not make any difference at all. Zeke then turned to the examiner and asked if it was allowed to switch weapons mid-test, and the examiner nodded and said yes. With a smile, Zeke told Rangus that it was okay to change, and Rangus, after thinking about all his past struggles and the sadness he had felt, found the courage to stand up again. Taking a deep breath, he said that he had made his decision. He would use a spear,